Hello, welcome to How to Sew with Laura Tanzer. I am your guide to all things design. Today we are going to learn how to put basically a facing onto a garment, and I'm going to do it at the neckline. In this project that we're working on, our little eyelet top, the facing actually is like a lining piece. So it's more than just a little facing at the edge. It actually lines to the midriff of the garment. So here's our garment. We've got our shoulder seams on here. Here is our underlining piece, our facing piece essentially. And you can see it's kind of a short, well, black against black, but you can see it this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to put right sides together, just like we do when we're sewing a regular seam. And so I'll show you this part right now. So I have this right sides outside. My seams are inside. My lining piece, I have it inside out, so you can see my seams on the outside, and I'm going to fit it. Well, first I'm going to make sure that I have my front to my front and my back to my back. Typically you can tell the difference between front and back. Your front neck is always lower, see the curve here, than the back. And that's the way we're built. And so we want something that's not going to come and cut up as here, unless of course you really want something that's going to, like a turtleneck. So we're going to fit front to front, back to back. So all I do is I open it up and I fit it around. I match my shoulder seams first. Okay, so we're matching up. We've got right sides together. I am matching my shoulder seams first. So the first thing I do is I line up my shoulder seams, seam on seam. Typically my patterns, as I've mentioned, I have notches. So I should be able to see where my centers are. So I match my center back notch and my center front notch. And I'll put a pin in each of those. As we know, I'm not fond of using a lot of pins. So I'm not. If you feel you need to use more pins, go for it. But I've basically got 4 pins. 1 on each seam, 1 center back, 1 center front. We're done. No more pins. So what I like to do is, because it's a hole, basically, right? We've got a big circle here. I fit one side over the table and the other side under, and then I can just maneuver it all the way around. And what I will do is I will always start at a seam rather than a center. And it's just a good practice to always, if you're doing something like this, where you're putting 2 pieces together or you're going to do a circle, you really should start at a seam or a junction where it's less visible, because the visible stitches, you don't want to see like a back stitch or an over stitch. You just want to see a nice one-time clean stitch. So now we're going to sew on the machine, so we'll do a close-up. Okay, so here we are, we're at the machine. I'm lining up my back. I'm doing my back first, and this is just a practice that I do. I like to do the back of my garment first. It's just my thing, whatever. You can do it however you want. That's my practice. Okay, so this is a regular seam now. I've lined it up at my 1/2 inch line, and all I'm going to do is maneuver this around, always following, making sure that my edge is at my 1/2 inch. Okay, so this particular style is a boat neck, and so it's not perfectly round. So what I'm doing right now is I'm fussing a little bit more when I get to my next side seam, and I will fuss again when I get back to the original side seam. But what's going to happen is I'm going to go a little bit slowly. I'm going to stop with my needle down right on my seam, because I need to make a hard turn. So I lift my foot and I turn my fabric. And remember, I'm using my very happy, my very neat knee pedal thing so that I got both hands free. And then I just line up my seam again on my 1 inch, and I have to adjust my circle so that I can get everything lined up. All right, I'm getting close to my original seam. And when I started that seam, I didn't start it exactly on the seam line. I could have, but I didn't. And I will just end up turning. So I'm going to go putting my needle in, using my little knee lever to lift my pedal, my foot rather. And then I just go over my original stitch for about 1 inch or so. And I'm done sewing it. So the next part will be very simple. We need to, because it's a curve and because we're going to be turning it, we need to trim it, and we also need to allow for a little bit of ease. And because when we turn it, the line that we sew is wider than the inside edge of our seam allowance. So there's less fabric here than there is here. And so one thing we do is we trim, so we make them almost the same. And then the other thing we do is we do a few little clips along the curve to allow for turning it inside out and allowing for this to expand to this. So this is going to be much wider than that because our curve goes this way, like a smile. And the bottom of the smile is always longer than the top of the smile. So we're going to do that next. So here we go. I'm going to trim it first, and then I'm going to clip a few places. So I'll show you how I'm going to trim. I'll start, and I'm really just trimming like about half of that seam allowance off. So the seam allowance is 1/2 inch. So maybe 1/4 inch, maybe a little less than 1/4 inch. So I just take it along here. You don't want to trim so close to your seam line that it invalidates the integrity. Oh, how about that for a mouthful? You just want to be able, the seam line has to have something to hold on to, so you don't want to go too close to that. So that's why I go about halfway and I just take. Okay, so I've trimmed it. It's nice and lean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of little snips very close to, but maybe halfway again, but not all the way to the seam line. You stop short of the seam line because you don't want to break the seam. And where there's more curve, I put my little clips a little closer together. So at the shoulder, there's a little more curve. So I do a few clips closer together. Then at the wider curve, I do them a little wider apart, maybe 1 inch apart. Most of the time, you want to let the curve guide how far apart you're going to put your notches. So just say the tighter the curve, or the more curve there is in the curve, the closer together you want your notches. Final step is I'm going to turn and press, and what I'm going to do is, so here you see the front side. This is going to face, eventually it's going to be turned like this. Before we turn it all the way though, I'm going to press that seam towards my lining piece, and I'm going to do a top stitch. What I've done is I've got it opened up on my board at the small end, and I've got my seam going under my lining piece. And all I'm going to do is press that out, press it open like that. Gets a little tricky around the shoulder because the shoulder's got that edge to it. The seam is going under the lining part. In this case, it's my black fabric. And I'm pressing it flat out like that, and then the final step will be to do an edge stitch on the black part and then return it, and you'll see how lovely it is. It lies really nice and flat. All right, now back to the machine. Okay, so I'm doing the same thing I did before. We've got a big circle. Part of it's going underneath my table, part of it's going across the top. I'm sliding it so that my black is the part that's in the machine. In this instance, in most instances, there's less fabric for the lining. You know, it's a smaller area, so that's going to be the part that you want to push in here and leave all your big part out there. But also, it's partly just my preference. Now, I have to find my shoulder, so I can start at a shoulder. Here we go. So again, it's pretty easy for me to tell that my seam is under there. Two reasons. One, black would show through, and I don't see it. And two, you can sort of feel like you can feel the little bump of the seam if you go over there with your finger. So what I try to do is keep my black part as flat over here as I possibly can, and the white gets bunched up because it's not going to be sewn on right now. Right? So again, I'm starting at my seam, and I'm going to be doing it as close to that seam edge as I possibly can. Okay, that's what an edge stitch is. It's right at the edge of the seam. So I'm doing it really slow so that you can see what I'm doing. No pins needed. Really, pins would just get in the way. So you can see, well, hopefully you can see, but my stitching is right up against the edge. And I'm going to do that along the whole thing, all the way around. So we've sewn our edge stitch all the way around. It's nice, it flattens out your lining. I want to show you what the lining will look like on the inside when it's turned. So I'm going to turn it inside out before I turn it the other way. And see all those clips on the white side? See how that is going to fit the curve, the wider curve. So we needed those clips, okay? Just wanted to show you that. That's why we do it. And now we're going to turn it the way it should be turned, which are wrong sides together. It'll look a little flatter once it's pressed, but that's our piece. Thank you for watching, and next time we will be working on how to finish off our sleeve edge, and there are a couple of different ways to do that, and we will learn those. So, thank you again. Until next time, I'm Tanzer.